is now on.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. It's 12:06. I'm glad we waited. Hopefully we have good audio for anybody interested in watching in the future this presentation. Thank you, Laurel, for coming to present to us here about this research project. Take it away.
All right. Hi, everybody. I just want to start out introducing myself really quick. Do I need to get closer to this thing, or are we pretty good?
Yeah, in fact, if you take the
really
base
close
and kind of bring it over.
Put it right in my face.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I can hear myself now. This is creepy.
Well, even closer is better.
Like right, I feel like I'd have to swallow it.
Yeah, like right there.
Right here. Okay. Good. All right. So my name is Laurel Hagen. I think I've met a lot of you before, but I've lived in Moab since 2001, although right now I'm in my first year of law school. And I've been working on water for a lot of that time, a lot of it in Moab. And so I think I helped co-found the Moab Area Watershed Partnership, which Arnie is now sort of in charge of. Would you say you're in charge of it, Arnie? Or? Excellent. And so one of the issues that has come up many times is just that we all get a lot of water from the one creek through town. And I've always been curious about the structures, both physical and legal, that govern that creek. And so now that I'm in school, what this is it's a project it's a very limited in scope, so I guess that's one thing I want to emphasize, is that it would be simply to do research and then at the end produce a written paper that hopefully would be usable to the community, to water rights users, all of those kinds of people, to basically better understand the particularly legal but also physical structures that constrain and govern our use of Mill Creek in particular. A lot of this, however, this would be specifically focusing on Mill Creek as sort of a case study. And Mill Creek has many similarities and some differences to a lot of the other smaller watersheds in the Colorado River Basin and in Utah. But part of this is that I would get to work with people who are doing either innovative or just using existing law in Salt Lake and around the state, and sometimes in places like Idaho, for example, that has a water banking system, to see how those structures could apply to our creek. The scope, however, it's just a summer project, and so this is not about actually making anything happen, or at least just my project. The idea would be that this research would clarify the sort of scope in which we would be acting, if anyone even chooses to act, which this could, just file away and everyone could ignore it forever if you wanted to, although I probably wouldn't and would come back and be annoying about it. But, yeah.
And in terms of scope, too, because Mill Creek is such a big drainage, the physical, so as we know, water is flowing through Mill Creek above, but from Mill Creek Drive, where that bridge is and where the water is irrigated.
Well, and actually I'm going to talk about that a little bit. It would primarily, the primary focus would be what goes on with Mill Creek through town. So from the last major point of diversion, which is, along Mill Creek Drive, after you pass over that turnoff to LaSalle Road and that sort of thing. And then probably to the confluence with Pat Creek, maybe to the confluence with the river, something like that. But I'll get into that, because there are certain things within the project that I can certainly say this is what I'm starting to look at, but certain things may change through the course of what gets uncovered.
And I just want to add, too, that one of the compelling reasons and why it's really great that you're proposing to do this summer is that several of us have been sitting in this this Mill Creek project. What is it called? What's our group?
Mill Creek Vision.
The Mill Creek
I think they use the word
Vision. One thing that we said is that Mill Creek's getting pretty run over with tourists, and if we were able to generate more water and more flow in the creek below the diversion, that it could expand recreation opportunities and decrease the impact on the upper canyon area, right?
And I think the idea is that if the city or water users themselves decided that was a goal that they wanted to donate rights to be able to get more flow through town, then that would require probably also doing some landscaping and check dams and other restoration projects on the ground. And what the scope of my project would be to create this sort of legal, theoretical, and also infrastructural framework for making that happen.
Yeah.
because it is, legally, it's a very complex issue, which is why it's worth doing a paper on for school. And it's really interesting. So if I'm going to start, I will kind of talk about narrowing some of the scope a little more as we go through, but I wanted to start out with sort of an overview of how Western water works, just because I know a lot of people may have some idea, but maybe not entirely, and I'll move through it fairly quickly because it's a pretty complex topic, but just to see the context in which this project operates on a wider scale, basically.
And I just want to point out the council has a camera here.
Oh,
so if
okay.
Yeah, so
that makes so much more sense.
This presentation is for all of you, but we're also looking here.
Got it.
If it looks like we're not looking, I always like to point that out.
I know, well, yeah, actually, I kind of looked at it and then didn't register it, so yeah, that makes sense. There's so much more technology in this room since last time I was in here. It's very impressive. I remember we used to just shine stuff up on a wall.
Yeah.
So, yeah, okay, great. So, there it is. So just to start out, there are essentially two basic principles that govern how water is assigned and who gets to use it, who gets to keep it in the United States or the Western United States. It's very different from the East. And so the two principles are called prior appropriation, which is also known as first in time, first in right, and the second one is use it or lose it. And these are sort of principles, neither of them is in itself legally binding, they're just sort of the structure on which our laws are actually built. So prior appropriation starts with the first person who gets to the water and actually puts it to whatever at that time is considered a beneficial use, which at the time was mostly irrigation and sometimes drinking, stock watering, establishes a right to keep that amount of water for whatever they would like to do as a beneficial use, basically indefinitely. And there are strictures on that, but that's the basic idea. And so in our valley, most of the biggest, oldest water rights are held by the Moab Irrigation Company. There's a few that are large irrigators that are elsewhere, and certainly some wells. But if we're talking, this discussion will mostly focus on surface water. We're not going to talk too much about groundwater, and so everything I'm saying applies mostly to that. So yeah, first in time, first in right. And the second principle, which is more important for what we're talking about here, is the use it or lose it principle. And it's that if, in the state of Utah anyway, if you have a water right and you just don't use it for 7 years, so you leave it in the stream, for example, and your water right is for, say, irrigating an alfalfa field, and you just stop, then it is what's called subject to forfeiture, which means you don't automatically lose it. You can still, use it or not use it for many years. Sorry, I got too far away. If no one ever complains, then you just keep using it as much as you want and when you want. However, it is at that point, if someone, might be mostly the state, it doesn't happen very often. I think it's very rare that someone actually loses a water right, or at least has been. Then it's subject to a petition to divest you of that water right by saying basically you're not putting it to a beneficial use and therefore you don't deserve it anymore and someone else wants to use it. That is, again, a very rare instance. The problem with that, of course, is that it actively discourages conservation. And this is a pretty well-known principle, I think, throughout the West, that if there's, especially in olden times when water was relatively plentiful because there were just fewer people here, that it was and is still sometimes pretty common for people to purposely waste water and take it out of the stream and then dump it into a place where it's not really needed because they were afraid of losing their water right. And dumping it into a place where it's not really needed is one way to sort of keep it and say, well, I'm still taking it out of the stream, therefore I'm still putting legally beneficial use, and therefore it's sort of a way to guard against forfeiture. The problem with that, of course, is that what it actually does is that even when an irrigator may not need a water right, say for a few months, because they're sick or just don't want to use that field, they will still very often divert it and then just stick it into a corner of a field where it just creates like a tiny weird pond and nothing really happens with it. And then it's also, the stream doesn't get it, and there can be some pretty strong ecological effects as well as community recreation and that sort of thing. So these are all really well-known issues. I don't think anyone would argue with most of them. And they apply kind of throughout the West, particularly in dry areas. So, and this is one example of how that works, is that right now in the Colorado River system as a whole, the oldest, largest water rights are in the very lowest point of the system north of the Mexican border, and that's the Imperial Valley. And so like this article was talking about as the Colorado River system as a whole gets less, has less water in it and there are more demands upon it, the older water rights holders will have to shorten their own rights and take less water. The newer water rights holders, I apologize, I switched that. The newer water rights holders, the ones with who started using it later, start to lose their water to the advantage of the older water rights holders, which in this case happens to be Southern California. Yes. Yeah, no, that's thank you. That's a much better way to put it. The senior water rights holders get to keep their water. The junior ones lose it if there's a call on the system. That's and again, a call on the system as a whole hasn't happened very much yet. And the reason we're starting to talk about it is because of this. The Bureau of Reclamation put out a study a few years back that's been updated since then, but this is sort of the big chart that a lot of people have seen. And it is that the historical water use, obviously in the Colorado River Basin as a whole, is going up and up. And the supply is very variable, first of all, and that the concern now is that the amount of paper water that is assigned will very soon be no longer enough to cover the amount of demand. The amount of paper water that is assigned will be more than the amount of actual physical water, the wet water, that there is to fulfill all of that paper. This is also a problem in the Mill Creek Basin. And this is something where this isn't something I'm going to address directly in my project. It's more to give a context as to why we are studying these issues. The Mill Creek Basin is in many ways a pretty good microcosm of the Colorado River system as a whole. So right now what's going on throughout the Colorado River Basin, and Utah included, is that everyone is doing what's called a set of drought contingency plans. In Utah, we also have the Governor's Water Conservation Plan, which is related to this. And it's basically everyone getting together and saying, all right, since we know that there is more water assigned than we are likely to continue to have, how are we going to split it up? And everyone's supposed to share. And then to do things like keep reservoirs certainly full and ensure longer term use. And everyone has to live up to the obligations that we have to deliver to senior water rights holders. So we have the recommended state water strategy. It's still pretty new, and this is something the governor's team has put together, and I believe that team is still ongoing. And so they had a whole bunch of goals, and the ones that I'm focused on, and that some of the newer proposals coming out are focused on implementing, are the ones that are highlighted here. So it is to preserve natural systems in the face of increasing water demands. A lot of it has to do with the fact that we could just manage our systems better. And so it's things like expand tools to protect in-stream flows, more efficient water delivery is kind of in the middle on that one. And then facilitate development of environmental water markets. And then water markets in general too would be not just for environmental purposes, but could be for anything. So there's a few ways in which existing water law could be applied to Mill Creek and stream flow. And here I kind of want to step back in that I am a first-year law student, and a lot of this is self-taught. and part of the purpose of this project is to, kind of solidify some of this. And then also that when I talk about not only sort of existing principles of water law, but also there's proposals sort of going around that are very reputable. There's a whole governor's committee, the Division of Water Rights is working on it to establish water markets, which we'll talk about in a moment. I have not been in any way involved in any of those, and I've only just really started learning about them like a couple of weeks ago. and so I want to be like very realistic about my current level of ability to accurately answer questions, and also just to, like, if there's anything that I say that sounds completely weird or that's off in some way, I might be wrong, and I want to be realistic about my knowledge level about what I'm about to talk about. So, but part of it, of course, is to find out about these things and how they apply to Mill Creek specifically. So, in application to Mill Creek, there's a few different ways that if a person's goal is to get more water in the stream, because we are a federally listed impaired stream under the Clean Water Act, and it is basically due to lack of flow, although they don't really like to say that. But there's a few different existing legal structures. The first one is that people can donate water rights. And while in-stream flow is designated as a beneficial use in the state of Utah, that type of water right, where the designated use is to leave it in the stream, can only be held by The state parks and rec, state fish and wildlife, or trout groups like Trout Unlimited. They're the only ones that I'm aware of that actually hold any, although there might be others. Trout isn't really relevant because we don't really have any in Mill Creek, and so kind of that's out for us. And then the problem that, well, that can be a good or bad strategy, and the good part is that it is permanently held water right. The bad part is that it requires actually buying a water right and then donating it, and then the state just manages it kind of how they want. The way the in-stream flow rights tend to be is that it is from point A to point B. So say from this dam to this bridge, and the water right is for a certain amount of water in the stream from that point to that point. However, we're a small stream, we're not really high priority, and so while I certainly in no way would want to throw out that option, and it's something that I will look into a little more, I'm kind of less interested in that one than in some others, because that's something that tends to be more applied to like big trout stream type rivers. Then another one that hasn't been, that's kind of one of my pet theories, and that is the non-use petition theory, and that I'm going to skip ahead. Oh, that's what I just talked about. So there's the illustration. I forgot I had one. Sorry, I had an all-nighter for a paper due yesterday, so I'm a little incoherent in trying to focus on everybody's face. So the non-use petition theory. On the plus side, there is an existing law. A non-use petition is basically when you go to the state of Utah and you file a petition saying, and it's usually like, I got sick, my irrigation equipment broke down, something like that, and therefore I have this water right, and I'm not going to use it, and then I'm not going to divert it, or I'm going to maybe just intermittently use it. But I don't want to, it's a way to guard against the danger of forfeiture, even if you know you're not going to use it for some identifiable reason. And there's a list of reasons that are considered acceptable. It is rarely used for conservation purposes, even though you can, and there it is. So this is all part of this, the part of the Utah Code that talks about non-use. And an appropriator can file an application for non-use, and I cut out a bunch of bits that weren't relevant because a lot of it is just equipment hardship and that sort of thing. It can be filed on all or a portion of the water rights, including water rights held by a company. After giving a written notice to the water company, a shareholder may file a non-use application with the state engineer on the water represented by the stock. The approval, and this also applies to just any private water right as well. The approval excuses the requirement of beneficial use of water from the date of filing, and a non-use application or a series of non-use applications does not bar a water right holder from using the water under the water right as permitted under the water right. I didn't write that, so that's you can blame the state of Utah for writing that sentence. So the idea is then under the approved list of reasons, there's the regular hardship reasons, and then there's a few. Unfortunately, yeah, they didn't put them up there. But a few of them have to do with a goal of water conservation, water efficiency, groundwater recharge, and the implementation of an approved watershed management plan. All of those purposes have to be approved by the state engineer's office. But the idea is that let's say I had a little alfalfa field up where Powerhouse Lane is, and I had my own little dam, and I decided that I'm not going to grow alfalfa anymore. I'm not going to grow it for 1 year, and I just want to leave it in the stream because I like fish or something. And then I can go and file a petition with the state of Utah saying there's an approved watershed management plan here. Arnie knows all about that, and that we also have a federally listed impaired stream, and leaving water in this stream would help with the goals of that of the watershed management plan. It would also help if we could also, because what a watershed management plan is not listed in there specifically. I would imagine that the governor's watershed management plan or water management plan might be able to be cited in that as well. But again, everything I'm saying here is speculative, and it is what I would be studying, is sort of the ins and outs and the logistics and the realities of these kinds of approaches. But in theory, that's how it would work. I would just say, I'm not diverting for this 1 year because I don't want to, and I file a non-use petition, and I leave it in the stream, and then it gets to stay. So that is one theory. I probably wouldn't spend as much time on that because it isn't as well established, and there is no movement aside from me to make that actually sort of happen on a wider scale, although maybe we could try. So this is kind of an oddly placed slide, I think, but part of the issue too is that at this point, this is looking very long term, so this is the bigger picture thinking. But if one of the things we're looking at is to try to make our systems more resilient to not only possible climate change issues and drought, but also the idea that under that Bureau of Reclamation graph we were looking at earlier, that it is possible that there will be calls on various parts of the basin. And there was a call on the Yampa last season, so that's why this is up here. And it's very new. It's still, again, speculative.
That's because the Yampa went dry.
Yeah, the Yampa went pretty dry, and what a call means is that we're getting to a point where the junior water rights holders are no longer allowed to use their full apportionment because senior water rights holders have a right to the water first, and there is no longer enough to fulfill all of the rights. And this would be a very huge deal, and many negotiations would happen throughout the country to make it not happen quite in a drastic way. But at some point, if there is effectively a call from the lower basin, Los Angeles, Arizona, those entities get water before the upper basin does. And we are in the upper basin of the Colorado River. And so we might be called upon to deliver water out of local watershed systems. But again, I don't want to freak anyone out. That is very speculative. It's entirely theoretical. And it's maybe something I would... And I may be microphone angry again. Yes?
So Laurel, if I may interject, and Arnie, where this call on might come into play here is that the city and the county both own relatively junior, I'm talking about groundwater now, I'm diverging, but it's the same idea. San Juan County has quite a bit of water rights, or they were granted back in 2011, but they're junior water rights. If there's ever a call on our aquifer here, for example, then presumably it would be San Juan County that would be the first to go.
Yes.
And any homes built in San Juan County would no longer have water.
That's probably never going to happen, but we're specifically with the call generally dealing with surface water.
Yes.
And if I understand correctly, Moab's, the Knicks, don't forget the state always owes the water. The Knicks, aren't they prior to the 1922 compact?
They are.
So they technically aren't subjected to the call about call and the call about river.
They wouldn't be unless there was an agreement negotiated that said otherwise. Yes, but you're correct.
And most of the time when we're talking about the call, it's on surface water.
Yes. I don't know how a call, I mean, you could have a call theoretically on groundwater the same you could on surface, but anytime someone talks about a call, it's surface. Absolutely. Yeah, and I do want to be, again, I want to be realistic about the whole call on the river situation. The amount that we would likely be pressured to contribute to that larger thing, the system in a whole would have to be in a pretty dire state for us, our contribution to be significant, and for very senior water rights holders to be pressured to do that. However, when, as it says at the very beginning of the Utah Water Code, water is not private property. And it is subject to negotiations, treaties, and all of those kinds of things, and in a way that land is not, or at least not nearly as much. And again, I think there's a lot of stuff I'm saying here that sounds really scary. I'm trying to say it as partly just because I think it's interesting, and also because it's the things that I'm thinking about when I'm looking at projects like this, because as we get more into this, I would hope that the result of any action based on the research I'm doing would be that our delivery systems for water in our entire basin, particularly surface water, although we're connected because there's sometimes we trade back and forth, but that they would become a lot more robust and a lot more able to deal with pressures. And pressures, that I think are likely to come up, and that anyone who's looking at our projected growth rate and our projected water supply knows is coming. And so while the scope of my project is very specific on in-stream flow in Mill Creek, and just the idea is to look at how these larger structures interact with that. And then also there is a huge potential amount of funding available for water entities that want, and I'm talking millions of dollars that other basins in Utah have got, for upgrading water infrastructure, and particularly precision delivery methods. And I was talking to someone who was saying that I think it's Emery County they got so well funded off because they taxed themselves to fund it, but that their water master can control all of their ditches off of his phone, off of his smartphone, and I don't think we're anywhere near that, but it is a thing that's certainly possible. Did I make this angry?
The group I'm talking about, they also did it with $7 million in money.
Like that. Oh yeah, that was a huge amount of money. However, there are really large amounts of money available, and I don't think anyone's suggesting that. So it
David,
went
her
away.
presentation just went.
Do I push
to
the button
sleep.
again? Maybe I didn't touch it enough.
Wait, don't. It takes a sec, right?
Push it harder. It's red now.
Let's see where this goes. Uh-oh. The spinning wheel of death.
Uh-oh.
I wonder if when presentations are going, if we could do like split screen feed.
Oh, it's just not on that.
There's you can get fancy. But not today.
Yeah. Is there a ejected
Rachel's
restart
out,
type thing I could do?
and Summer's out,
Just
and
take it?
Carmelo's out, and it's yeah, right. This whole week is complicated.
And I don't absolutely need the PowerPoint. It helps, but
That is kind
Did you eject it? Oh, you just pulled it out. Okay.
yeah, sorry.
That's all right. Just stick it back in and see what happens. See what happens.
Just remember the mics are live.
at one point she said,
Yeah, so that resolution.
No, it's okay. It's not red.
It's gonna take a second.
It's a spinning wheel.
I concur.
inspection was $26. And then another place she says, the inspection fee depends on the number of rooms or something like that. And presumably, if you got a big apartment with a whole bunch of rooms in there, presumably the fee would vary with that. She might say that later on in the chart, just $26.
Okay, so just needs clear.
Well, it didn't. He couldn't even get it uncircled.
All right, see if you can go to
As you're listening.
Weird. I wonder why.
And
I can just reboot and then I'll just talk.
I could send out the link.
Yeah, it's not
Listen
necessary.
to his instructions.
Everybody's time was limited yesterday, but I did request
She did vote
that
yes to the.
we have an add-on tour sometime to just go up to Crescent Mountain.
But that's essentially.
Oh, yeah, I've never seen that one.
I think from,
Because it
I have
wasn't
an
able to
overhead area
get
shot,
encircled, it's dead.
been overlaid, but I thought it would be interesting to see on the ground. Mentally prepared.
That vote was to
Yeah,
encircle.
yeah.
But if they couldn't get it uncircled, it's done. Yeah. Did he? Yes, he did. Did I say that I would run a marathon about it?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it would be an excellent use of our
It's like in a year.
port and our. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, because, I mean, you just can't do it. Third time is not a charm at the legislature.
The Week magazine.
Well, what do you think?
So I'm going to reboot. It's not. This is the present. These illustrations aren't essential. I think the main thing we were just going to look at next was maps of Mill Creek, which I assume we all know basically where things are for the most part, and I can describe it as well. So I'm going to reboot now, but I'm just going to keep talking, and then we'll see if it actually keeps going. So let's say. So
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Of the group? So, because I don't know, because I didn't send it, did we all get the Laurel's presentation?
I did not.
No, you did not. Okay. So, maybe. It's on the comments sheet. Okay.
Not this. I only just did this like this morning. It's just the single page proposal. And everything I'm talking about now, honestly,
Thank you.
it's everything I've spoken about is technically outside the scope of what I would study. It's more just the context for why I think it's important to start looking at systems that make our infrastructure more able to handle pressure, basically. All right, yeah, this is going to take a minute. So the next possible theory to study on this would be that there are proposals out right now for water markets, and I am in no way an expert on this, but the very basic idea of what a water market or a water bank would do, and it's kind of an odd set of terms because it's not anything physical, so I think water market is probably a better way to express it. But the way I've had it described to me is that right now we have all these laws where someone can definitely lease 1 acre-foot for 1 month of their water. However, it's hard. It's just, there's a lot of forms to fill out. It's kind of a pain, and it just doesn't happen very often that way. And so what a water market in Utah would do is that it would set up a legal structure. So through the state legislature, and there are a lot of the ones studying it right now are people involved with them, to kind of grease the wheels on that process. And so that when there is surplus water and an individual use of the system, that it makes it a lot easier for them to sell it. And so if they want to sell it or lease it, so it wouldn't be permanently selling a water right, although you could still, of course, do that as well. And it wouldn't significantly change the way that that is generally done, and that you still have to officially register a change in the point of use and a lot of stuff like that. But what it would do is that, and I'm going to take a couple of examples. So let's say that you're a farmer who doesn't want to do your last cut of alfalfa because you're tired or want to go on vacation, or you don't get as much money out of it as you would like to, or whatever. And normally the farmer just will either try to do that cut or just not have much of a good use for that water. And there isn't, and it's to sell or lease that amount of water, or to lease that portion of your water right is really how it works, is a difficult thing to pull off just logistically. And so what a water market would do is that it would set up a structure to make it so that there would be a place where this farmer could say, hey, I have this many acre feet available on this system for this time period. Does anyone want to pay me for it and use it? And then that person who bought it could use it for whatever they wanted, assuming that it was not, then there's a checklist you need to go through. And these are all normal established water law things, assuming that it doesn't interfere with any valid existing rights and stuff like that. So you can't do it in a way that would interfere with someone else's existing use. But if you wanted to do that, then it would create a structure by which that could happen. And that anyone could lease these bits of water, or buy the short-time water, same thing as a lease, and could use them for any lawful purpose, is the current proposed language. Right now there's a joint resolution in the Utah legislature. It just went through the Natural Resources Committee. I'm not sure if it's been approved by the full legislature yet, but I included it in the thing that I sent out to you guys as an attachment. That gives it's basically endorsing the study of water markets, and it gives a basic use as to what the goals of what those water markets would be. And so when we get to what I would research, it is that how the establishment of such a water market in Utah, similar to what is kind of proposed now, although there isn't a bill yet, but that's being based partially on things that have been done in Idaho and Arizona. They both have water market systems and water banks. And then also possibly a couple of other theories, like the non-use application thing, which is still just my pet theory, and a couple of other things. And see how they would apply specifically to our flows, our water rights, and our infrastructure. And the biggest part of that, of course, is the Moab Irrigation Company. They have extremely senior water rights. I believe they're definitely older than the state of Utah. They might be the oldest continuously operating entity in this watershed. I don't know, Arnie or Mike might know that. But they're very old, and they have a lot of rights and a lot of control. And so the way that they manage is a big deal, but also we have a lot of other entities as well. There are private water right holders whose water rights interact with those. There are the city and the county, and then also groundwater and sewer, and they're sort of partially Moab Irrigation Company and partially not. And so all of these systems interact in some pretty complex ways that would all affect how we might get flow into the creek, and also just how we might get more efficient water delivery in general. And so the two kind of meatiest parts of what I would like to study is, one, how do all these existing water rights and governance systems interact in ways that make it easier or harder to get efficient flow management? And then also, how does our infrastructure work? And that right now, a lot of what we're using is sort of a very old and more patched together system that often is negatively impacted by, for example, the city's infrastructure improvement activities. And if we can have good planning around some of that, there are certainly ways to get money to upgrade it, so that water users can get their apportionment correctly and maybe a little more accurately. And then also, if water users wanted to do flow projects, then they would actually have the capability of doing that. However, I want to stress that because water is a very touchy issue, every method that I'm looking at is entirely voluntary by all parties involved. There is no possibility of coercion. So whoever holds a water right in itself, whether it's a company, an entity, a person, and also whoever holds any kind of shares in anything, whether it's a Kenslake thing or an irrigation company thing, the participation in any kind of flow enhancement project would have to be entirely voluntary on pretty much every count. So the only part to study is just if I'm like, and one example, for example, my boyfriend was building his house and didn't have a way to use his water right for a while. And he could have, and he would have been very happy to leave that in the stream, but he didn't really have a good way to do it. And so the idea is for people who are interested in something like that, how would it work? And so what that does is both give us a structure by which we could enhance environmental flows in Mill Creek for recreation, for water banking in terms of helping our aquifer. That's the more physical kind of water banking. And then any other goals that we wanted, or just because it's pretty and we like to swim in it. But it would also ideally uncover and untangle a lot of those structures of how water rights and water delivery works around here in ways where it all be written and intelligible to an interested person, like, the audience be a lot like city council or city staff or really anyone who wanted to know how it works. Right now, as far as I know, that is certainly in some people's heads, but is not gathered in any particular location. I think that's it.
So,
oh, and I'm sorry, the thing I'm asking from the city, I forgot. I'm hoping to get funded through the school. And so the thing I'm asking from the city is essentially a letter.
When you say the school, you mean your law school?
Sorry, yes, law school. I'm applying for a summer fellowship to do this. And so my payment would come from that. And so I would be partially sponsored and help through the academic programs at University of Utah Law School. But what I need to get funded is to be working with a nonprofit or government entity, and I need working with a lawyer because it's law school and they like that sort of thing. So what I'm asking for the city is essentially a letter of endorsement that I can put with my project saying, first of all, we think this is a valuable goal, assuming you do, and also that I can have sort of free access to bother your lawyer, whoever that designated person that may be. So that was it. Any questions? Yes?
So I'm wondering if you could opine about the benefits of this change in state code to the state. Does it help them in their negotiations with other compact members?
That is something where it's such a dangerous topic, and I don't know enough what I'm talking about. So I actually,
I'd answer that if you'd like.
yeah, please, Arnie.
So Mike and I attended the water rally a couple months ago where they were speaking about changing some of our water laws, which is a very touchy subject for everyone. I wrote a nice note. I don't know if any of you had time to read it, but I tried to make it as short as possible from our experiences there. What the change in water rights or the water banking system for the state, each state is doing it differently. Okay, they're all a mix of the system. The idea behind it is it'll benefit the state of Utah because water that's currently not being beneficially used can now be moved to a better beneficial use place in an easier manner. Mm-hmm. Okay, can I leave it at that?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would agree with that characterization, but again, not my area of expertise. And I've been cautioned by every single person I've talked to not to offer my opinions and analysis because, first of all, I am underinformed about the issue, and also because it is so touchy that I could, say a sentence wrong in a way that really triggered someone who knows about all of the technicalities of how this legislation may be set up. And I don't want to do that and interfere with an effort that I'm not actually a part of. I just want to study what it might do.
And so then your work would be, you would be based out of Salt Lake doing this work?
No, I'm coming home for summer.
You're going to be living here. Mm-hmm. And then are you going to need office space or will
No.
you? No. So you're basically just asking for access to whether it's our city attorney or perhaps our assistant city manager or our city manager. You need access to and signature from one of those three.
Well, and it wouldn't necessarily be a signature from that person. This is my understanding. It's not in order. So the qualifications for the funding that I would like to get are essentially that I need to be working with government or nonprofit, and that government or nonprofit needs to endorse that this is basically it's a worthwhile project, I guess would be the way to do it. Okay. And then you need a letter to that effect, and in that letter it needs to say we have an attorney that will be working with her, and to me, and that's a very vague phrase, it doesn't really mean that much, but it basically means someone that I could bother when I have legal questions. And it's what qualifies it as a law school eligible project.
And is that something that we can agree to? Do we need to put it on our agenda? Do we need to have a vote? What's the...
I guess one of my questions would be, do you have any idea how many hours that might be?
I actually been trying to do some math. Honestly, it's really difficult because it's mostly about me having the self-control to keep the project within certain bounds. And I have another research project that I'm helping out with on John Wesley Powell in the Colorado River, and that lasts until the end of May. And so once that job is over, then I would start on this. And school starts again, I think, the third week in August. So, and I'm still waiting tables. So, so it would be, I would guess, because I was trying to do some math on what it was, and I was going to say between 200 and 300 hours, probably more than 300, because I don't have very much self-control.
Okay, but that's on your end and not that many hours from the city attorney.
Oh, no. Oh, I'm so sorry. I completely answered your question wrong. I should have been clear.
I should have been clear, only because we have to,
no, I completely understand. Not 200 or 300 hours from the city attorney. I mean, I would guess the max would be like an hour and a half a week, and that would be like the maximum. I mean, honestly, the main attorneys I would probably be working with is there's a couple of attorneys that are working on just sort of the theories and structure of water banking, and also just know much more than I do about water in Salt Lake. And then also I have a research assistant position with the school as part of my fellowship that is with the Stegner Environmental Center, and then also the specific research project I'm working on right before this is with the dean of the law school, who's a Colorado River water law expert, and so he said that I can bother him about it as well. Okay. So I would probably realistically be bothering those people more, and this would be more like kind of checking in to say, first of all, like if I'm investigating a certain avenue, is this a crazy avenue for some reason, or is this something the city thinks is interesting, and just kind of bounce some ideas off of. But I think if I'm kind of consulting for technical expertise, unless that does happen to be someone who works for the city's area of expertise, I would probably be mostly asking people in Salt Lake. And then a lot of who I would be talking to also wouldn't be lawyers. A lot of who I would be talking to is people who know about the logistics of our water delivery systems here. So people at Groundwater and Sewer, at the irrigation company, and then also people at the city, like the city engineer's office and that sort of thing.
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah. Eric, do you want to come up and just into the microphone, or speak of the devil?
I'm Eric Johansson. I'm the assistant city engineer, and those two are back there, Mark and Didar, are also with us. So you mentioned in your work that you might so far you've been talking mostly about legal stuff, but in your introduction you mentioned infrastructure.
Yes.
So I just want to know what kind of infrastructure recommendations we would be looking at.
Well, and actually there definitely would be something. I think I do want to caution just on the word recommendations, and that the purpose of my thing is this isn't a paper in order necessarily, unless people really want this. It wouldn't be necessarily to make recommendations. It would more be to sort of uncover the existing structures. And I say that just because recommendations can be sort of a politically loaded word, and I'm not empowered with any ability to make formal recommendations on any topic. But okay, so putting that aside, what it would be is it's looking almost entirely at surface water. And even though there are some instances in which that interacts with our culinary water systems, so that's why I say mostly, what I would be looking at is particularly our ditch systems and the head gates and flow measuring devices.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So that we would need to have measurement tools in place.
Correct.
And what kind of measurement tools do we currently have in place?
Emily,
yeah.
if I may interrupt.
Sure.
The elephant in the room that nobody here has addressed that I can, because I'm on the board, is the Moab Irrigation Company. All right, yeah. So let me speak for them for the moment as best I can. Obviously, I'm only 1/5 the board, but ground rules. So you guys look out here right now, is that there's a lot of water in the creek. There is water going through the creek right now, and that's going to be true from November 1st through May 15th at the end, 24/7. In the summertime, most of us are asleep, but typically there's water in the creek in the evenings, even on hot summer days. And the reason is that there's 3 dams east of town. They're out there by Powerhouse Lane, by not far from Pear Tree Lane. You can see them. You can walk out there. There's the irrigation. So let me give you the bad news first, then I'll give you the good news. There is some good news. All right. The bad news is we're overbooked right now, the irrigation company, with the promises that we make to our users. Promises basically 4.2 acre feet delivered during a 7.5-month season per share. And there's people in town own anywhere from a fraction of a share to several shares. Typically, small-time users through town. Farmers will own anywhere from 10, 15 to Pete Bird out on the west end of town who has 44 shares. So we've promised all these guys water, and we really don't have enough water to go around. Part of we actually do have much of that water that we need if we could get people. There's 3 different ditches. I give Kaylin what the ditches look like through town. If we could get all those people to share their uses and rates so that, in effect, there's a constant flow of water going into the pipes all the time. That's not what happens. What happens is that people want to water in the daytime. They don't want to get up in the middle of the night to go turn on a valve. Most people don't have pumps. Most people don't have timers. So that's why they want to come home from work and open up their valve. So the result is that in order to make people happy, we divert more water than we really need to. And so that's why at night when people turn those valves off, water starts to get bypassed back up in the creek because the pipes are all full of water, but the water's not going anywhere because everybody's gone to bed. So at this, without any improvement in that sort of infrastructure, if you will, the irrigation company is going to be reluctant to give up any more water for other purposes because we don't have enough as it is to service the people that we have. If somebody wanted to sell shares, or lease them, if you will, then in theory, unless state law gets in the way, if that were considered a beneficial use to let it flow through town, then we'd be all set. But until that time, so where it could help is if Laurel could help us get money, grants, like she's pointed out, the state law is changing. The state's starting to spend big time money on it. And for example, if money were available, so we've got roughly 115 users total, spread across 1,000 shares. If those 115 users could see money thrown at them to help them measure how the rate at which they're using it and how long they measure it and that kind of good stuff, that'd be a huge help, all right? Because then we could try to say, well, Joe, you won't mind getting up at 1 o'clock in the morning because your timer will do it for you. And other things that we could do, there's 3 dams, there's 2 gates basically at each dam, and I already know you can buy from companies automated systems that would make Levi and Chuck, those guys, proud. Fancy systems with cell phone interactions and SCADA and all that good stuff. But we're talking about a lot of money, tens or $100,000, hundreds of thousands of dollars of money, and we don't have it.
Yeah.
The whole irrigation company's whole budget is under $100,000 a year. So if we could get some money to improve the system, clearly we are living in the dark ages out there. We've been getting away with what we've been doing because there's been enough water and people, they complain, but for the most part they get what they want. We probably haven't been taking what they've been promised. So to add an additional burden of additional water through town is still another strain. But if we could, help get some money to know more and to change the way we do it, that would be a great thing. That's the good news.
Yeah, and I think everything you're saying is absolutely right. And I think that a big part of the goal of this project would be that, the reason that the irrigation company has been operating in the dark ages is because you don't have the budget to move out of it. And I'm sure that I read minutes and I've talked to some, the ditch master and stuff like that sometimes, and that a lot of the issues are things that could very easily be overcome with if there was the money to improve the technology. And right now, we all see it, literally some of the technology is like a piece of plywood in the gutter. And while that's, that works great if there is plenty of water or if there's enough and everyone's willing to sort of share shortages. But as soon as you get things like a decreased water supply and an increasing population, for example, that becomes more difficult. And so I think that the stuff that you're talking about, Mike, is exactly what I want to study. And I think a lot of what you're saying, there are several people in this valley where they could just lay all out 95% of what would need to be done. But that when that information is in one person's head, it isn't necessarily as useful, and because they may not be able to, have occasion to communicate it in a way where it's actionable. And so I think that what I would like to do is have that type of information that you just talked about, and in a great deal more detail, down on a piece of paper with the kind of lovely maps and diagrams that I like to make. And and have it by the end of the summer, and probably maybe extend it a bit because I tend to obsess, but be out in written form where it would be the kind of thing that, for example, you could submit to NRCS for a grant, and that also to emphasize that, as you said, like there's no ability in any of this law for anyone to force anyone, including the Moab Irrigation Company, to do anything with their water. The only thing that, the way that we would get in-stream flow is by agreements with the irrigation company's board itself based on the desires of people who have shares. And so, it's not like the city or me or anyone else could come in, or anyone except the state, I think, is the only entity that could come in and say, you just have to leave water in the stream during the day, and no one's going to do that. It just won't ever happen, or at least not anytime in the future. So the idea is to, I am running short on time. I optimistically said 15 minutes. That was hilarious. But yes, so that's the idea.
That was really thorough, Mike. Thank you.
The only other thing I might add is Mark Stilson, for example, when we tell him about these kinds of problems, he goes, oh yeah, well, typically what happens is farmers go out of business. Gary Wilson up here, who's on the GWSSA board, he's struggling to make ends meet, doing alfalfa and hay and that kind of good stuff. And so if those folks retire from the business and do something else, then we have a little more water to deal with. Right now, as it is, even at ideal conditions, it's a little short with the longer numbers of dry years in between the wet years and so forth. Yeah. So right now we're a little short even at best. So the water banking idea is a great idea, and particularly if we could create some, a path or two down and enjoy the flowing water, then that would be a reason to enjoy. One thing Laurel hasn't told me, it gets tricky. If I originally thought she wanted water to flow in the creek 24/7. All the time, so to support aquatic life. She says, nah, that's not really necessary, but what you haven't told me is what do you need? It matters because, like I say, things change on a daily cycle. Sometimes it's dry, sometimes it's running, and so what do you really need?
I think actually that's something that a biological person would be better equipped to answer than me. I know that for any amount of increased water is good, especially if you do things like check dams, and I think I'm skipping through because I had a picture of it. Oh yeah, this is my hilarious joke at the end of the presentation. No, but what we actually might get is that. But that's pretty cool. And so the idea is that, you don't, I'm sure that for many kinds of aquatic life that the 24/7 flow is by far the best. Yeah, no question. But that particularly if you have increased flows even at night. But this is where, a much larger project than is the scope of my project comes through. But you get, people like Jeff and Cara, and they're with their plants and their bulldozers and they're stacking rocks, and you get chances for greater water infiltration and stuff like that, and pooling, and a little more of a pool and drop pattern. But you need more water than we have going through there now, ideally, to make something like that really work. And so in terms of the goal of my project or what it needs, that's not really within its scope. What is in its scope is how to make it happen for whatever amount of water really anybody wants to voluntarily put that they own or that they have leased into the stream, and how to make that available.
Well, it's 1:00, and so it feels like we are presented as a council with the opportunity to say yes. However, there is a little bit of capacity, and David's not right here to talk about capacity of those few hours.
Sure. And I don't need an answer right this second. My proposal's due on March 29th, and so what I would need is a letter from the city by that date, ideally the day before, basically saying kind of the 2 points that I requested is, one, we endorse the goal of this project, and two, that we can provide some attorney time and oversight.
So a real quick straw poll, is this something this council would be interested in doing?
So,
Yes.
yes, and we have a contract firm specializing in weather rights as another resource, so it's not necessarily staff capacity.
Oh, for Laurel to interface
Yeah.
with? Oh, so, I mean, straw poll?
Yeah, and I just, after we get a capacity answer from David, and I guess I was just kind of curious because I don't know what that firm bills out per hour, so depending on the nature of, yeah, might just.
Yeah, and I would love to consult with them, but if it's, an hour's billing problem, I also have other attorneys I can.
Joel, do you have a comment?
We could talk to Jeff at the firm and see if they're willing to do some pro bono work on this project as well. The firm that we've hired has a history of doing water banking. They're very familiar with this type of stuff.
Smith Hartfordson.
Okay.
And so they're very, very familiar with it. I've worked with Jeff Gaines on water banking programs before, so it's interesting.
Okay, so we'll proceed with those questions about capacity and then let you know with a potential letter.
Cool.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, and thanks for giving me your time, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
David will follow up and do that
Just,
process.
make sure he knows he's not here.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
Wait, we've only noticed one meeting for today, so I think we shouldn't formally adjourn because that might prevent us. I think we just need to take a break, a recess.
A recess, okay.
But,
that's a good point, and then we'll meet back at 5 o'clock for our
Right,
closed
but I
session.
could be totally off base.
So a motion to recess.
I move we recess until 5 o'clock.
I'll second.
Thanks, Ronnie. Favor?
Aye.
Aye.